It's one of the strongest rebukes that we've heard yet from an American political leader when it comes to the war in Gaza. Here is Senator Elizabeth Warren responding to questions about Israel's tactics at a mosque in Wayland a few days back.
As an application of law, I believe they will find that it is genocide, and they have ample evidence to do so.
GBH News reporter Tori Bedford broke that story, and she joins me now to talk about what else Warren had to say and to break down new GBH News and CommonWealth Beacon polling conducted by the MassINC Polling Group about how Mass residents feel about the conflict. Hey, Tori, thanks for being here. Let's start with the poll. Based on the survey that we were a part of, do people in Massachusetts support or oppose Israel's war in Gaza?
So we saw kind of a mixed result out of the 1,002 people that pollsters spoke to over that roughly 1 week period, the end of March. 40% said that they're opposed to the Israeli government's actions in Gaza, 34% support them, and 26% didn't know or refused to answer. And that's broken down, within strongly oppose or, slightly oppose. And I think 19% said that they strongly oppose.
Any interesting breakdowns demographically when it comes to how people feel, or is it across the board similar sentiments?
So I saw actually similar, in the 3 questions that I looked at about Gaza, I saw similar sentiments between people who had, highly educated, so, a college degree, an advanced degree, and then people who had a high school degree or less.
They were on the same page.
Yeah, which I thought was
interesting.
Yeah, but across the board, I think there was, when you look at these polls, and I hope that we continue to do more polling to see how these trends kind of shift. I went and looked up the Gallup polls nationally, which have, in November, we're showing, I think, a 36% approval rate for Israel, which is similar to, to our language that we used, right? Because we didn't talk about a ceasefire. We talked about approval of the Israeli government's actions. And then now, the most recent one in March, it's 55% of people are against the Israeli military's actions in Gaza.
It's a notable shift.
Yeah.
So we did ask how the U.S. should respond to the war in Gaza. What do people want to see us doing? So
47% of those surveyed said that they would like the U.S. government to intervene and to push for an immediate end to the war.
And just 21% said support Israeli leaders in the war. That's a striking finding, at least to my eyes. And what do people say about how closely they've been following this? Because it's, one of the top stories in the news every single day. Are people paying close attention?
So majority of people said that they were at least paying some attention. And most people actually said that they are paying very close attention, which I think really reflects like a shift in terms of, I would think that people at this point, 6 months in, would have a little bit of fatigue about this, which is really unfortunate and something that, we've seen with a lot of conflicts and tragedies across the world. But I think that people are seeing these horrific images on social media, and it's really causing them to want to get involved. I spoke to one activist, Ellie Gerzon, who said that, they've been doing this for 9 years, and they've never seen so many people who have never made a call to their representatives before, who've never, had any kind of political activism, want to get involved. People from all across the spectrum of, humankind want to do something.
That's interesting. I'm glad you mentioned, even though we didn't poll on it, but the role of social media when it comes to disseminating images that shape the way people think about this. That's a fascinating point. I'm glad you brought that up. You talked with Jonathan Sarna from Brandeis University. He's the head of Brandeis' Schusterman Center for Israel Studies. He argued to you that the way these questions are framed can have a big impact on how people say they feel about the war. What are some examples of what he's talking about?
So advocates for, sort of pro-Palestinian advocates said the same thing, where they were saying if you had said the word ceasefire, then it would be higher in this way. And he was saying that if there had been language in there about hostages, about the more than 100 hostages that are being held by Hamas right now, then people would remember that, because he believes that 6 months out, people are not talking about hostages as much anymore, but he pays attention to Israeli media and he pays attention to American media. And he says that, in Israel, there is a lot more discussion about the hostages, and they're top of mind. And there's this feeling like that could be your kid. And so that that sort of is a justification for what has otherwise shifted a lot of people's perspectives.
But tell me if I'm wrong here. My sense, and I'm not someone who tracks this on a daily basis by any means, but my sense is that families of many of the hostages have been very critical, right?
Well, that's not even just a sense. I mean, in the last week, we've seen protests in Tel Aviv where tens of thousands of people have come out, including family members of the hostages, and called on Benjamin Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel, to step down and are in opposition of the way that his government has handled this. Many people, even people related to people who are currently hostages, believe that, you know, the hostages are in danger from the way that the military has focused not just on getting hostages back, but also in completely getting rid of, you know, totally destroying Hamas.
Eliminate Hamas, which the Israeli military says is sheltering in civilian infrastructure, so you go after the whole thing. Right.
And I think, I mean, according to the Gaza Health Ministry, at this point, it's over 30,000 death toll for civilians, which is significant.
There does seem to be an ongoing shift in the way politicians in Massachusetts and elsewhere are talking about the conflict. As I mentioned at the beginning, you got a hold of this video in which Warren spoke at a mosque in Wayland and suggested that what's happening in Gaza right now qualifies as genocide. Let's take a look at a little more of what she had to say.
For me, it is far more important to say what Israel is doing is wrong. And it is wrong. It is wrong to starve children, women, a civilian population in order to try to bend them to your will. It is wrong to drop 2,000-pound bombs in densely populated civilian areas. I think I can make a more effective argument by describing the behavior that is happening and whether I believe it is right or wrong, and look people in the eye and say, do you want to tell me you think it is right? And that it should be the policy of the United States of America to support those actions.
Those aren't new criticisms from Senator Warren. She's been pretty consistently critical of the way the war is being waged. But I'm wondering how the crowd in the video that you got a hold of, how did they respond to Warren saying, yes, this seems like it qualifies as genocide, but it's really not a term, I'm paraphrasing here, it's really not a term I want to get focused on using here. Instead, I want to say that the war is being fought wrong, et cetera. Did they feel like she was backing away from an important piece of terminology?
So we've actually reversed the order of her comments, which makes sense for this segment, but she said that part first, and then right after she said what you just played, people said, you didn't answer the question. It was a yes or no question. Do you think it's a genocide?
Okay.
And then she answered, and she kind of couched it by saying, if you want to make a legal argument, she says, they will find ample evidence to suggest that it, to find that it is a genocide. And she's talking about the International Court of Justice, which in January said that they had plausible evidence to suggest that it was a genocide. So she was saying that the International Court of Justice will find ample evidence to say that it is a genocide.
But she had to be pushed into offering that assessment, and it wasn't quite a full-throated, as I see it, there's no question this is genocide.
But once she said the word genocide and she said, yes, I think you will find ample evidence that there is, the crowd went, it was raucous. People were clapping and cheering.
Interesting.
So I think they just wanted her to come out. And I think that is also representative of kind of a national push for politicians to be on the same page as their constituents and the importance of rhetoric, right? Because she also said that she's trying to get away from a labels argument, which she thinks can kind of put up a barrier. And I think that ties into the social media aspect of it as well, right? Like, how do we all sort of work together across the aisle? But I think that we've reached this point politically where people are saying, you can't really fence it on certain things, and we need you to come out and say the word genocide. And even though she couched it, they were very happy to hear her say that, but that specific word.
It'll be interesting to see what she and other members of the delegation have to say. Lloyd Austin, the defense secretary, said, I believe just today, that he did not see evidence that genocide was occurring. We can take a quick look at that countervailing point of view.
Is Israel committing genocide in Gaza?
Senator Cotton, we don't have any evidence of genocide being created.
So that's a no. Israel's not committing genocide in Gaza.
We don't have evidence of that, to my knowledge. Yeah.
Just to remind people, Tori, what are some recent developments that may be helping to ramp up skepticism among Massachusetts voters and United States voters more broadly when it comes to Israel's conduct in this war?
So we saw last week that Israeli airstrikes killed 7 World Central Kitchen aid employees, and that's an organization, humanitarian aid, that was coming in, that was one of the biggest suppliers of food to people in Gaza. And I think that kind of woke people up a little bit because, we can look at these big numbers of 30,000 civilian deaths and then to see if they're pulling aid out, one of the organizations that was able to get in there and actually help people is now not feeling safe because they felt that they had the assurance that they would be able to do this humanitarian act. That is then it creates this odd dichotomy where you've got the president also calling for a ceasefire while supporting an $18 billion arms bill.
That is not a dichotomy, but it seemed like that attack that you're talking about, the World Central Kitchen attack, that seemed to really animate President Biden in a way that we hadn't seen him be animated before. I think because he has some personal ties with that organization. And your point's an excellent one. Numbers as big and horrible as they can be, you can also become inured to them. The power of anecdote, the power of individual specific experience is really strong with stuff like this.
Yeah, I mean, he called for a ceasefire, but at the same time, he has not stopped pushing Congress to approve this bill for F-15 fighter jets and munition and military aid and training for Israel. And so I think 40 members of the House wrote him a letter last week, including Speaker Nancy Pelosi, which is really significant that she would break with him, saying that they are opposed to this funding of military aid to Israel.
Well, like you, I hope that we continue to do more polling on this stuff so we can track the way this stuff evolves. Tori Bedford, thank you.
Thank you so much.